Hello and welcome into this Monday, July 21st edition of the League Winners Fantasy Show. Today we will be starting the NFC divisional breakdowns with the NFC North, that being the Vikings, Packers, Lions, and Bears, where there's been a lot of changes, a lot of players staying in the division but moving teams, some coaches staying in the division and moving teams. Before we jump into that, it's been a little bit, there's been a lot of news. The news I really want to address is the Rashee Rice news. Now, if you haven't been in the news, he has been sentenced by the courts, and the NFL is now making a decision about what a potential suspension will look like. Until they make that announcement of what the suspension will be, I'm not going to change my projections for Rice. But once that's done, the Kansas City wide receiver will have his rankings adjusted, and I'll let you guys know where I went with that. A lot of other moves were made, a lot of other things have happened. Anything in the NFC I'll get to when I get to those breakdowns. In the AFC, some of it will be discussed in later videos. Some of it doesn't have a lot of fantasy relevance, but if you have any questions, always feel free to leave them in the comments. If there's something that happened that I didn't address, just ask a question. I'd love to answer it on the next show. Without further ado, to get into the NFC North, I'm going to start us off with the Green Bay Packers. Now, the NFC North as a whole was very successful last year. 3 playoff teams. Chicago was the non-playoff team, and they've gotten a lot better. The Packers are just going to start us off here. Jordan Love's a good player. Jordan Love is going to be a good quarterback. I had my doubts about him even last year. He's proven he can play. I had him for over 4,000 yards passing this year, nearly 30 touchdowns. I think he's a good player. Fantasy-wise, though, he's not going to be a top quarterback. I have him just outside my top 12. Once again, a guy that you can probably play. There'll be weeks where he has very good performances. Doesn't really provide enough of the rushing upside, and isn't a Joe Burrow level passer to have the top tier fantasy value without that rushing upside. But just something to name to keep an eye on, a potential later round quarterback or a very high end QB2. That's where I'm going to be targeting him most likely, would be a high end QB2. If I wait on quarterback and I want to have 2 on my roster, Jordan Love is the guy that I may be targeting as the second of those quarterbacks, mostly because he has a lot of options. So the wide receiver room in Green Bay is ridiculous. They have bringing back pretty much everyone, plus they drafted Matthew Golden in the first round. Sorry, Aaron Rodgers, the Packers will draft first round wide receivers. Matthew Golden out of Texas was their first round selection. I think he has a chance to come in and be near the top of the team in targets, but I think the targets are split very evenly across this team. I have the leader of this room technically being Jaden Reed by just about 4 targets, followed by Romeo Doubs being the second of those guys, and then even Tucker Kraft coming in right around the Matthew Golden numbers, Tucker Kraft being the tight end. There are a lot of pass catchers on this team, and the work is going to be split up all over the place. I think that hurts really every wide receiver. I don't know if there's a guy that I'm targeting on this team, just because I don't know who it's going to be. I project it to be Jaden Reed. I have him leading in touchdowns, leading in receptions, leading in yards, all the way across the board, but I'm not confident in that. He's not a guy I'm going to be going out of my way to target. If you think that, Dontavian Wicks, or maybe this is the year Christian Watson stays healthy, be my guest and take that shot. I'm not going to be taking that shot very often, just because I think it could be so close between all of these guys. The tight end, Tucker Kraft, I have him around 8.5 fantasy points a game, actually the second highest for any pass catcher on the Packers. But once again, there's a chance that the receivers get so much work that he's almost boxed out of his offense. I don't know where he's going to end up. In terms of where I have him at right now, I have him projected in my top 12 tight ends at tight end 11, but that doesn't mean I think he'll finish as a tight end 1 at the end of the year or anything like that, but that's where I have him projected at this moment. The only sure thing on this Packers offense, I believe, is Josh Jacobs. Was very good last year. Expect him to be very good again this year. Over 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns, a little bit through the air. Not a lot. The touchdowns are really the hardest thing to project on this team, the receiving touchdowns. If Love throws 30, somebody's going to get a good amount of those, but who are they going to go to? That's the question. I don't think the running backs get any of them just because of how many weapons there are out wide that you can spread out this offense with. I'm hoping Josh Jacobs isn't affected by this, by them trying to run a 5-out offense a little bit. I don't think they will, and I expect Jacobs will be able to perform. I'm just about 14.5 fantasy points per game, inside my top 10 running backs at RB9. But I think he's a very strong player, and this offense, he's really the only sure thing. The other 2 backs are Marshawn Lloyd and Emmanuel Wilson, neither of whom I expect to take too much of his work. They'll get a little bit. I don't expect him to go for 300 touches or anything like that, but he could get there if he gets enough of the passing work. He could touch the ball 300 times this season, and you'd be very happy with that. He's another guy he's going to have a very good season if he stays healthy. I expect him to be able to stay healthy this year and be productive again, and he's really the only Packer I'm actually targeting in fantasy. The receivers, the tight ends, even Luke Musgrave's guy I talked about, he's going to do just enough that maybe he takes away some of Tucker Kraft's value. And if that happens, you're going to be really annoyed at him. There's just so many options here. And maybe Jordan Love's the big winner. If Jordan Love took a Baker Mayfield type leap this season in terms of having a really high touchdown percentage, I have his touchdown percentage right around a little over 5.5%, which is still really good. But if he jumps into the 6 or 7%, he could be a very fantasy relevant quarterback. But I'm not going to project that until I see it from him. I have to see that he's able to do that before I make that projection. He's able to do it consistently. But the Packers they're just such an inconsistent team with how many weapons they have. I expect them to be very good on the football field, but they just have so many options. You don't know who it's going to be. A lot of the Packers wide receivers are guys who may want to target in the best ball format, where you're not having to set your lineup, you're just getting whoever has the best week, because there's going to be a week where Romeo Doubs has 150 and 2. There's going to be a week where Jaden Reed goes off, Matthew Golden makes a big play, even Christian Watson can make a big play. You just don't know when it's going to be, and as a manager in a regular redraft league, you're going to be kicking yourself for playing the guys the wrong weeks. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings, this is a team I have a lot of questions about because of the quarterback situation. Sam Darnold came in last year, picked up right where Kirk Cousins left off the year before. Now it's J.J. McCarthy's turn. Was drafted last year, if you remember, got injured in the preseason, in the off-season activities. He's back this year and is the starter. They gave him a full year off because of the injury. What he's going to do is going to determine how well the players on this team can do in fantasy, with the exception, of course, of Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson's going to be just fine, pretty much regardless of who's throwing the football. He's going to get the ball thrown his way a lot, and he's going to do a lot with it. I actually had him for 1,600 yards and 8 scores, which is good for 18.5 fantasy points per game. My wide receiver 2, just behind Jamar Chase. I expect him to be phenomenal, even if J.J. McCarthy isn't. The big question is, how many times can he put the ball in the end zone, J.J. McCarthy that is, and can he spread it around to get everyone else involved? The Jordan Addisons and the T.J. Hawkinson, those are the 2 guys that I'm looking at as the biggest question marks that are dependent on J.J. McCarthy. If J.J. McCarthy plays to the level a lot of people are projecting him to, Jordan Addison and T.J. Hawkinson are going to be great for fantasy. But if he's below that, I don't know if I'm going to be confident in his ability, Addison's and Hawkinson's, to be fantasy superstars this year. I have Addison projected for over 750 yards and 8 scores. If he can get in the end zone that much, McCarthy can get him in the end zone, he's going to be good for fantasy. I'm over 10.5 points a game, right around where I have Jaden Reed, but with a lot more confidence than I have with Jaden Reed. Whereas Hawkinson I have for just 600 yards and 3 touchdowns, actually a little behind Tucker Kraft in terms of the projections because of the touchdowns and the yardage and everything. I'm not overly confident in either of those 2 guys, but they're guys I'll probably end up with on my teams just because the upside is really high. Addison and Hawkinson are both really good football players, and if McCarthy can get into that next level, they're going to be great for fantasy. One thing I'm not doing is drafting J.J. McCarthy as a fantasy quarterback on any of my teams, He's a guy that I am not looking to have my team. I have him projected in the bottom third of the league in terms of fantasy points at quarterback. I just don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant this year. He could prove me wrong. He could come out and sling the ball over the field, but looking at his Michigan tape and watching him play there, he wasn't a guy that was doing all of that. He had a strong run game in Michigan, which he could have here in Minnesota. Aaron Jones is back this year. I'm projected for over 1,200 yards, 3 scores though. 6 scores, excuse me. The ground game isn't as strong as it was at Green Bay. Aaron Jones will have a good year. Nothing ridiculous though. I don't have him projected for anything crazy, just around the RB, just outside the top 12 as my running backs. I think he's going to be good. I think he's probably going to end up undervalued at draft day, and that's a big deal. I think there's a couple, Aaron Jones is really the one guy that'll go under the radar. People are very excited about J.J. McCarthy, similar to what we'll see when we get to the AFC South and Michael Penix. But a lot of people are excited, but the run game is kind of going under the radar. I think Aaron Jones could be a bit of a sleeper this year because he'll be going later in drafts and a little bit older. The guy behind him is Jordan Mason. You remember Jordan Mason last year in San Francisco really stepped up, but I don't know how much work they're going to give him. I think both guys will get a little more work in the passing game than you'd expect, just because of the young quarterback, maybe hitting some of those dump offs. I think that's really where Aaron Jones' value would come from this year. I have him projected for over 40 catches this year. Jordan Mason could get more carries because of that, and I might see that projections change as training camp goes on. We get reports out of Minnesota that maybe Jordan Mason's running more with the ones, something like that. This Aaron Jones hype could come down a little bit, but for right now, I expect Jones to be the clear one here, get passing work, and have a really good season. Jalen Naylor is another receiver out there in Minnesota who might get a little bit of work, and the rookie Ty Felton out of Maryland, a guy they drafted this year. He might come in. I kind of expect him by the end of the year to supplant Jalen Naylor as the wide receiver 3. But with J.J. McCarthy playing quarterback, I don't think there's necessarily value of the 3rd wide receiver in Minnesota this season. A name to keep an eye on in the future, though, because if McCarthy grows grows into a strong quarterback, or the quarterback people think he can be, Felton will eventually become a guy that you're targeting in drafts and looking towards. And like I talked about with Hawkinson, he could have a great year. I'm not overly high on him. Something you'll see from my tight ends, I have a lot of them projected in a similar range, and there's a lot of guys I'm okay with getting. I don't mind having Hawkinson on my team. I would honestly rather him than Kraft, even though I have Kraft projected higher. But it's just a name, one of a lot of names that are going to be in the little late round tight ends. Late rounds are going to be very relative, but he's a guy that I think I have projected a little bit below where he's being drafted. But if he's sliding or you feel confident about him, he's a guy that you can definitely take a shot on. The Lions are a team that really shouldn't have been a challenge to project just because they've been such an explosive offense. Their biggest change in the offseason would be Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, leaving for Chicago to become the head coach. And we'll get to the Bears here in just a minute, but Ben Johnson gone, it becomes, what's this offense going to look like? It's not going to look the same as it did with him, but what's it going to look like? Are they going to be as explosive, or is this going to be a team that tries to slow the game down and win with their defense, which we know Dan Campbell, the head coach, does not mind doing, winning with his defense. So it'll be very intriguing to see what happens there. With that being said, Jared Goff is a guy that I don't have projected very highly because of that. I don't know if he's going to throw the ball as many times. I don't know if they're going to run even more as many plays as a team. They have such a strong running game with the 1-2 punch of Gibbs and Montgomery. I don't know that Goff gets a ridiculous amount of work this year. I have projected for, 14-5, which is once again in the lower half of the quarterbacks. Not a huge Jared Goff supporter this year, and that kind of trickles down into Amon-Ra St. Brown. Let me clarify. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is a great player. I have him for a great season. 1,100 yards, 100 catches, 9 touchdowns. But where that stats out is now still inside the top 10 wide receivers, all the way down to wide receiver 8. And he may be going a lot higher than that by draft season, just because some of the names in front of him aren't guys that you're necessarily targeting. Of course, a couple of them are, but he'll probably end up a little higher than that. He's a guy I'm not going to spend a first 2-round draft pick on likely. With his ranking overall, I have him around 15 in terms of wide receiver, running backs, and tight ends. That's very much on the range of second round picks. But with there's so much wide receiver talent, I don't know if Amon-Ra is the guy I'm going to be taking. Because they also do have James Williams. Reports are already coming out of camp of his route running looking strong, his hands looking strong, which is a big deal because he's had a bit of a drop problem to this point in his career. If Jameson Williams takes the next step, which I'm kind of projecting him for, that could cut into Amon-Ra's work. I think the two-headed monster of Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams could combine for 2,000 yards receiving, which is about half of what I have Jared Goff for. So I think those two take a lot of the work, which also means Sam Laporta, the tight end, I have a little bit lower than I thought. Still very good. I think I have him actually in the top 5 tight ends. Yeah, I have him right there at tight end 4 right now. Tight end 5 right now. But it's going to be, what do they scheme for him? Is he getting schemed open, or is he having to win in his routes? If he's having to win in his routes, his targets will be just a little bit lower. Very good player, he can win in his routes, but if he's not getting schemed open, he's not going to be as productive. Once again, I have projected for 66 catches and 6 touchdowns, over 700 yards. Not a bad year at all. But he's going to be a name that might be going higher just because of the rookie year. We saw what he did. He is coming off a down year, so that could keep his draft capital a little bit lower. But I expect him to go high, and he's probably not a guy I'm targeting. The other receivers, Tim Patrick, back again, not really fantasy relevant. Brock Wright, another tight end, going to steal a little work from the board, but nothing to be worried about. The running game, I talked about him, Gibbs and Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, the 1-2 punch. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is firmly the one now. It seems to be a little handing off of power from Montgomery to Gibbs over the last 2 seasons. This year, Gibbs will fully take over the ropes. I've had him for more targets every year of his career, but now I have him for more rushes as well. I think he had a very strong season. I have him as my RB3 right now in terms of where I have him projected to finish. A lot of it comes because of that passing work. Obviously, in a PPR league, if he can get the 70 targets I have him projected for, that would be huge, nearly 500 yards. I have him for 14 total touchdowns, down a little bit from last year, but we expect a little touchdown regression from him, especially with Montgomery playing well. I think Montgomery is still a good pick if he can stay healthy. Now, of course, there was the injury last year. He came back in the playoffs from an MCL strain. If he's healthy, I think he could be still a very strong player. I have him just inside my top 24 running back, so I have him as an RB2. I don't know what his value is going to look like as we get closer to draft season, as reports are coming out of Lions camp. There's a chance that all the Gibbs hype actually pushes Montgomery down the board, and he could be a very valuable pick. If Gibbs goes down, Montgomery becomes an RB1 immediately. He still has a lot of juice in the tank. The Lions are a team that knows going to score points. Even without Ben Johnson, you expect them to score some points. I have them as a team projected for, almost 50 touchdowns offensively. And so so they're going to score a lot. Amon-Ra's going to be a beneficiary of that. Just maybe not a guy I'm as high on. Jameson Williams is going to be benefiting from that with 11 fantasy points per game. That means he's tracking in. I have him ahead of a lot of other big names just outside my top 24 wide receivers. I think he's a guy that might get pushed up draft boards, but if he doesn't, he could be a great value. Sam LaPorta is going to score, and the two running backs are going to score. This is a good offense to be a part of. Jared Goff is the one guy I'm really out on. Everyone else I'm at least taking a look at, and it's going to depend on where they're going if I take them. Just to talk about some other names that are right around Amon-Ra St. Brown while we're on the Lions, and I'll go into each of these position groups, top 12, where I have them ranked and where I would actually be drafting them in a later video. But just for real quick, guys that I have really right around him, Puka Nacua is a guy I might be looking at over him. A.J. Brown is a guy I might be looking at in that same tier. I'm going to take Amon-Ra. JSN is a guy I have right there that I might be looking at. And T. Higgins is another name, obviously from our AFC North video. I'm very in on the Bengals offense. T. Higgins probably won't be drafting him that high, but just kind of going around there that I'm looking at. And in terms of running backs that I have ranked right around him, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, even Jonathan Taylor or Josh Jacobs are two guys at running back that I would probably take over Amon-Ra St. Brown just because of the depth at wide receivers that we see this year. A lot of wide receiver twos who you're happy to have on your team. Jameson Williams, T. Higgins. We'll talk about Darnell Mooney in the NFC South breakdown. There are so many guys that are the second on their team that you would be happy having that I don't know if it's necessarily worth it to take a guy like Amon-Ra off of the second round and back in the first round. The final team here would be the Chicago Bears. New offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, new wide receiver Luther Burden, new tight end Colston Loveland. There's a lot going on with this team that's new. The holdover, Caleb Williams. I have him projected for a decent season, but I still don't know if he's going to be as fantasy relevant as we'd like him to be, or as he will be later in his career even. I have him behind Jordan Love just by a few points. I think he's a good player. I think if he puts it all together in this Ben Johnson offense, I'll look silly for where I have him projected. He has a chance to really blow out this year, and he could be a second-year leap at quarterback. With that being said, there's also last year to look at. Wasn't the best year for him. Of course, a lot of that was offensive coordinator problems and head coach problems, but that's something you have to keep an eye on. He doesn't have a ton of rushing upside. I only project for about 80 rushes on the season. Not a lot of yards, not a lot of rushing touchdowns. He's a guy to keep an eye on, but this division really isn't the one to look at in terms of top-tier quarterback play for fantasy. In real life, I expect Caleb Williams to do well, actually. I have him for over 4,000 yards, 26 touchdowns. I think he will be successful this season, and the Bears could be successful this year. DeAndre Swift's a guy I'm liking a lot this year. I have him around 13 fantasy points per game, just outside of my RB16. So it's in the top 24 firmly as an RB2. I like him a lot. Nearly 1,000 yards on the ground. I think he could get 350 yards through the air. Could touch the ball 280 times. If he can get that kind of work, which his competition at running back is Roshan Johnson, a guy that I have on dynasty teams and I've believed in for years now, but have been burned by repeatedly. I think if Swift can get the ball that much, he will be productive. Just in terms of volume, he's not the most productive, efficient guy. Not the most efficient guy, but he could volume his way to another decent season. I expect him to have a good season this year. I have him for 8 touchdowns. At wide receiver, it's a different three-headed monster. If you remember last year, they brought in DJ Moore. When they brought in DJ Moore, they drafted Rome Odunze, and they brought in Keenan Allen for their three-headed monster. This year, the three-headed monster is Moore's back, Odunze's back, and they drafted Luther Burden out of Missouri. Very good wide receivers. I think that as I was projecting this, I expected to have Rome Odunze very high. I don't have him as high as I expected. I have him around 11 fantasy points per game, but I do expect a good season from him. I have him as my wide receiver 33. So very far down there, but as a wide receiver 2, there's another name, a wide receiver 2 that could be productive. Now, when I was talking about these wide receiver 2s, I don't expect them to outperform Amon-Ra St. Brown, but there's guys you get later in drafts that you're not going to get a running back 2 that's going to put up value like Rome Odunze is. Now, DJ Moore, have him around 13 fantasy points per game, coming in just inside the top 20 at the wide receiver 19. He was good last year, expected to be good this year. I expect the offense to be more creative, and I think that could generate him more catches and more big games. For 12.5 yards a pop this year, I think that Ben Johnson can scheme him opportunities to get the ball. He is likely the best playmaker on this offense, and I expect him to perform that way. The rookie, Luther Burden, 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, about 8 fantasy points per game. If he's showing that he can do what he did in college, I think his workload will increase as the season goes along. But there are a lot of mouths to feed on this offense, so I'm not going to project him to go crazy right off the jump. At tight end, Cole Kmet is back, and they brought in Colston Loveland. They drafted Colston Loveland the first round out of Michigan, the first tight end off the board over Tyler Warren, who we talked about in the AFC South video with the Colts. Loveland is coming off an injury, so I have him projected a little lower just because I think he's going to get eased into it this season a little bit. But I have him out-targeting Cole Kmet and outperforming Cole Kmet. I have him for about 50 catches, 500 yards, and 4 scores. I think a good season for him, but I think really his sophomore year is where we could see the lead, as he's gotten used to the NFL and playing, apparently, according to reports from people within the Bears, playing a little bit of like a slot receiver sometimes. I think he could be a breakout guy in his second year. I wouldn't mind if he has a bit of a down year this rookie season, because a lot of the hype will go away, and we'll be able to get great value for him next season. This year, had about 7.5 fantasy points around everyone else. He's a guy I'll take. I wouldn't mind having Colston Loveland on my team. He's another one of the rookies who could be a trade for candidate after the first few weeks if he's not getting the work you expect. Cole Kmet is still there. Cole Kmet is still a player that's skilled. I think the touchdown numbers could be up. If Caleb Williams throws a lot of touchdowns, every one of these receivers is going to be the beneficiary. And it's a little bit different than Green Bay because they have 5 really strong pass catchers, whereas Green Bay has like 7 really okay pass catchers. I think all 5 of these guys are going to be able to coexist. I do think for this rookie year, though, Colston Loveland will be held back a little bit by Cole Kmet. We'll see as his career plays out if that ends up being the case, if the season plays out if that ends up being the case. But for at least the start of the year, I expect him to be held back a little bit by Cole Kmet. That actually concludes the AFC North. That is all 4 teams broken down. Next up will be the AFC South. And once we've completed the divisional breakdowns, I will get into my top 12 at each position in their own videos, just to let you know where we're at, kind of put everything in order with all the rankings finished. I have those set up, but as new comes out, I'm continuing to update. Also, we may have a special episode coming up here soon, hopefully. Got a little something in the works for you guys to try and spice it up a little bit. So thank you very much for tuning in, and check us out next time for the NFC South.